Hello again, juniors. So this week will be a little bit different than last week's when it comes to the video, because this week we'll be starting our extended writing project. So I'll give you some information on how to get started on that.
Alright, so argumentative writing. First off, what is argumentative writing? And I'm sure that all of you have experience with this in the past, but we're just going to go over some brief things to help us review what is involved in argumentative writing. So argumentative writing asks you to make a claim or take a position on a topic, and then to identify, evaluate, and provide textual evidence that offers support for that claim. Okay, so remember that with an argument, you are taking a side, right? There is something you are arguing for, and oftentimes something you're arguing against. That way, when you do your counterclaim, you'll have something to write about as well. So there have to be two sides. Taking a position and backing up what you say with logical evidence is a real-world skill, as well as being able to evaluate other people's arguments. So that's kind of where the real world comes into play. We want you to be able to make an argument that you can support, that makes sense, that contributes, instead of just throwing out your opinion with nothing to back it up. And we also want you to be able to spot good arguments when you see them. When you read something online or when you watch a video, we want you to be able to realize what makes a good argument and what makes just someone telling us their opinion with nothing to back it up. So if you haven't already, read through the prompt, and as you read through the prompt, in order to help you understand what you'll be asked to do, I want you to underline or circle any keywords that help you to understand what's being asked of you. For example, you could underline or circle cultural trends or redefine, any words that are going to help you to understand what you're going to do. And if there are any words that you're unfamiliar with, make sure you underline or circle those as well, and you know to look those up so that you can understand the prompt better. Then step 3 is to write the prompt in your own words, and try to use words that you would use in your conversations, not just picking words from the prompt itself. And the reason I'm having you do this is if you can put the prompt in your own words, then you'll really have a good understanding of what you're being asked to do. Okay, after you've done that, if you haven't already, again, read through the student model. The student model is by no means perfect, but it does show you an example, a good example of what you're being asked to do, a good example of an argumentative essay, and a good example of an essay that follows the prompt. Okay, after you read through the student essay, and you can even be annotating the student essay, I think that would help. But after you've done that, then I want you to ask yourself these questions. Did the student model follow the prompt, and how? What historical event, scientific discovery, or cultural trend did the student model talk about? And how did their chosen texts help support their chosen topic? Remember that you're going to end up choosing 2 texts from this unit to back up what you're saying about that historical event, scientific discovery, or cultural trend. And we'll talk more about those in just a second. And then lastly, what was the most interesting piece of evidence used to support the claim? Now we're on to our extended writing project pre-write, and this is the part where you're going to eventually pick your 2 texts and try and give direction to what you're thinking about for your essay. So first off, I just want to talk for a minute about cultural trends. Of the 3 choices, historical events, scientific discoveries, or cultural trends that the prompt talks about, I think cultural trends might be the trickiest to understand. So when we're talking about cultural trends, think about what's trending today. I think we use that word a lot in the media. What does that mean when something's trending? It means it's popular. It means people are talking about it, right? It's new generally. It's something that's recent. What culturally has been trending in the works we've read? So I want you to think about that. Okay, you could look at the music, You could look at dress styles. You could look at class systems, race relations, those kinds of things. Just thinking about the most recent text we looked at before the shutdown in The Great Gatsby, think about the music, right? We listened to some jazz. We talked about jazz. And you think about the dress styles, especially for women in the 1920s, was definitely different, right? The hairstyles were cut short. That was a cultural trend. The class systems we talked about, meaning who's upper class, middle class, and lower class. You could think about The Great Gatsby, old money, new money, and no money. We talked about that. You could also look at cultural trends regarding race relations. So we've talked a lot about the African Americans and how their place in society was evolving. You can talk about any of those kinds of cultural trends. Okay, so I've made a list here of the different texts that we've looked at throughout this unit, and for some of them it's been a while, way back in January, so you just kind of have to refresh your memory, and maybe you might even have some of these assignments, these paper assignments still that were handed back to you, and you could look at them and kind of refresh your memory. All of these texts, though, you can find in StudySync. All you have to do is go to the Library tab on StudySync and type in the name of it, and you'll be able to find that. And if you, for example, aren't able to get on StudySync, let me know, send me an email, and I can send you one of these readings. For example, the World War I poetry. We read, well, you had the choice of reading one of the 3 poems, but The Owl, Dulce et Decorum Est, and In Flanders Field were all World War I poems that you were asked to read, all of them written by soldiers during World War I. Then we also had the Harlem Renaissance poetry. 2 of these are by Langston Hughes, I Too Sing America, and Theme for English B. And then we also have We Real Cool. You can use any of those as well in your essay. Then underneath that we have The Great Gatsby, and although we didn't finish it, I think you'll have enough to talk about. If you chose that text, you have enough to talk about for an essay. And I'm working on videos still to help us finish that text. And then The Road, The Woman Warrior, Take the Tortillas Out of Your Poetry, and The Latin Deli. Those 4 have all been from during the shutdown, so hopefully you've done your readings for those. So for an example, when it comes to events, historical events, scientific discoveries, or cultural trends, I just gave 3 examples here of how you would go about finding these things in the texts. Okay, so for example, a historical event that you could talk about that redefined American society in the 20th century could be World War I, right? That's a huge impact on everything that follows. And we took the time to read 3 poems, or at least look at 3 poems from soldiers during this time period. So you might choose a historical event, you might choose to talk about World War I, and then you might use a couple of these different poems to back up what you're saying for your argument. For scientific discoveries, you could talk about nuclear weapons. And I know we didn't get a chance to talk about this as much as I really wanted to. There was a text called Hiroshima that we were going to read. However, we do have The Road, which shows us the aftermath of what happens when we're not careful with a scientific discovery like a nuclear weapon. So you could choose to talk about that scientific discovery and use that text to do that. And then lastly, cultural trends. I just talked about some of them from The Great Gatsby, but women's rights, for example, you could see some of the trends that were coming because of that. I think the dress and the fashion of women during the 1920s, the period of The Great Gatsby, is directly linked to women's rights. And we also have the Prohibition, which, because of that, we know it was failed, and the 1920s ended up being more about partying than it did about sobriety. So that's just an example of or a few examples of what you can do when it comes to choosing a topic, a historical event, a scientific discovery, or a cultural trend. As you think about your topic, so as you think about what you're going to choose here, a historical event, a cultural trend, or a scientific discovery, choose two texts then that will help argue how that topic helped redefine the American identity during the 20th century. Okay, this will take some time. I'm not expecting you to do it right now, but once you do choose the two texts, then you'll write them or type them if you're doing it online into that document in Google Classroom, the instructions document. Okay, that's where you'll put your two choices. Now that you've thought about your two choices, and you can pause the video to think about those, now think about what your counterclaim might be. So remember that the counterclaim is if you're taking one side. For instance, if you're saying that World War I helped define the American identity during the 20th century, you're using that to talk about for the first half of your essay. Then, in the second to last paragraph in the counterclaim, and this will make more sense when we start outlining, but in that paragraph, you'll think about the counterclaim. Okay, what would people say who say that World War I didn't redefine American society during this time period? What would they argue, and how would you refute that? How would you rebuttal against that? Okay, I know that sounds maybe complicated right now, but we'll talk more about the counterclaim. I just want you to start thinking about both sides of the argument. Okay, whatever topic that you choose, think about both sides. What would people say on one side? What would people say on the other side? So that you can show that you have an understanding of the complete argument in your essay. Alright, so that's as far as we'll go for the next 2 weeks. Overall, you just need to make sure that you know what texts you're going to use, what two texts you're going to use. You don't need to use any outside research for this essay, but the two texts you're going to use and the topic that you chose, either a historical event, a cultural trend, or a scientific discovery that helped to redefine the American identity during this time period that we've been talking about. Okay. Again, it might be a little confusing, but take some time to read through the prompt multiple times and circle and annotate and see if you can't break it down and figure it out. If you're still having trouble or if you still have questions, shoot me an email or comment in Google Classroom. If you're afraid of what your classmates might think from your comments, just write a private comment. That's fine too. Whatever you need to help you be successful in this, okay? So yeah, that's 2 weeks worth of work. Please make sure you're participating so that you end this course with an A and not an incomplete. Good luck, and we'll talk to you in another couple of weeks.